It's Canada's final frontier. When you talk to scientists who work in the Arctic, they get a gleam of adventure in their eye. They talk of wildlife, 24-hour sunlight, or whipping across the ice on a skidoo in minus 40-degree weather. But it's not all ice and snow and polar bears. It's a highly diverse ecosystem, and one that scientists of all kinds are eager to explore.
When you look at the tundra at a glance, it looks kind of brown.
That's Jeff Sorella. He's a botanist at the Canadian Museum of Nature.
But if you're there at the right time of year, say in early July when the plants are just getting into flower, it's a real lush, colorful area. Lots of colors.
They get to these remote locations of land by plane, by helicopter, and once even by paddling canoes. The goal is to create a baseline databank for future generations.
We know that the Arctic climate is changing, and changing rapidly, perhaps faster than anywhere else. To understand how the biome might change in the future, for how the plant diversity might change and the distribution of plants, we really need to know what the status of plant diversity is right now. So we're trying to get comprehensive, solid inventories of areas that document what all the species are and where they occur. So in the future we can go back and say, yes, this species was here, or this species was not here, so that when plants start to migrate northwards, as we expect will happen as the climate warms up, we'll be able to have that information of what's there now, so that we can look back and make a comparison.
The Arctic, from the tundra to shelves of ice, is a highly sensitive ecosystem, one where changes in climate have huge ramifications. For example, melting glaciers have an impact on sea levels, weather, and climate elsewhere in the world. It's also an area that's warming faster than anywhere else, and for scientists, our untamed north is a goldmine of data. The problem is, it's hard to get to.
Because anywhere you go, you have to either go by plane or boat.
In remote locations, especially off the mainland, costs can start adding up fast. A commercial flight from Ottawa to Iqaluit is more than $1,600, and it only goes up from there.
Helicopter time is about $3,000 an hour. Twin otter time is about the same or more.
Derek Mueller is an assistant professor at Carleton University. He studies extreme ice features in the high Arctic and in Antarctica. He's been up north almost every year since 1996 and is familiar with the costs.
Just for a scientist to stay in Eureka costs $400 to $500 a night. To fly up there, it would cost $5,000 easily, if not more.
Eureka is the second most northern Canadian outpost in Nunavut, making it one of the highest research stations in the world. It's home to an Environment Canada weather station, an airstrip, and PEARL, or the Polar Environment Atmospheric Research Laboratory. While the station monitors atmosphere and ozone, it's also a research hub for scientists who work in the high Arctic. At least, it was. In February, the government announced that funding for the station's $1.5 million annual budget had dried up. The Canadian Foundation for Climate and Atmospheric Sciences runs the station year-round and says full-time operations at the centre will have to end as of April 30th. Compared to the average cost of a research mission, Mueller says the price tag for PEARL doesn't actually seem that big.
When you think about what kind of science gets done up there, it's not really a lot of money. Throwing that away, and well, I'm sure that it will be reoccupied in the future, there's no question. It's such a valuable asset. It's just when it does get reoccupied, there'll be a gap in the data record.
When it comes to monitoring climate, it's crucial to have a well-informed data set, whether you're looking at plant diversity or ozone. University researchers can fill the gap to a degree. In fact, when PEARL lost its funding under the Liberal government in the 1990s, university scientists kept the research station open for a time. But Mueller says it can't be up to universities alone to monitor our environment in the high north.
In terms of the university funding cycle, you can't get money to monitor. The federal government has, in my mind, personally, I think that it has a responsibility to monitor the environment, and therefore it needs to put in resources to do so. You need stable funding that is not going to dry up at the whim of some politician, and that's unfortunately what's happening with Environment Canada.
Antony Lefkovich agrees. He's a professor of geography at the University of Ottawa. He's been researching permafrost in the high Arctic for over 35 years.
It's very difficult to do things year-round up there, and that cost looks entirely reasonable when you think of how isolated the locations are. I've visited Pearl, and it's way up on a mountaintop near Eureka. It's a world-class facility, and really there's almost nothing that can duplicate that data.
Where federal funding's falling short, some Canadian citizens are stepping up to fill the gap. According to the Canadian Network for the Detection of Atmospheric Change, almost $10,000 has been donated by private citizens to keep Pearl open.
What will eventually happen if we don't do the work is other groups will move in from other nations. So, for example, the Polar Stern has worked in Canadian waters. I'm aware of Germans who are working with a few, like a token Canadian, in order to be able to access sites in the Western Arctic where basically we don't either have enough money or sufficient logistical support to work at. So there will be other groups. There's huge amount of interest in China, in Korea, in Germany, in Sweden. And what will happen is, since they don't have the same area of Canada's north, is they will come in and do our work for us.
Mueller says that most of us feel a disconnect with the Arctic. But even so, he says it's important that we keep a strong research presence there.
Most of us live our lives stretched out along the border with the U.S., and we don't really think very much about the Arctic until somebody says it's going to be taken away. Sovereignty is not just warplanes, F-35s flying over, or patrol ships and war exercises. It's the sum total of activity that occurs in Canadian territories.
Away from the ice and back on the tundra, Jeff Sorella says the Arctic offers something that most people never get to experience.
You can be on the land and we see muskox walking past our camp. We've had caribou walk through our camp. There's just an incredible diversity of wild things. And we need to sort of understand how the wild Arctic might change in response to climate. We have a responsibility to Canadians that live in the Arctic to understand the area and know how it might change. And we have a responsibility to the world because Canada's got the largest proportion of Arctic territory on the planet. About 36% of the global Arctic is in the Canadian Arctic.